Hey, Pastor Josh here. We're reading Acts chapter 22, verses 22 through 25. And you and I should avoid unlawful punishment if possible. We should not just eagerly accept punishment, especially if it is unlawful and it is incorrect. If you can get away from experiencing a terrible situation, then you should take that way out. This is an example for us to follow that we're going to see with the Apostle Paul today. He is definitely willing to undergo beatings for Christ. He is definitely not one to shy away from even being martyred. He's okay with that. That's the whole reason he's in Jerusalem. He knows there's a potential for him to die in Jerusalem. But we see him here use a tactic to avoid a beating. Avoid a scourging. So let's read what has happened. He has just spoken to the Jewish mob. We have ended the speech, and now he had just ended by talking about the Gentiles, how God told him, okay, the Jews in Jerusalem are not going to listen to you, but you need to go to the Gentiles. And so when he says that word Gentiles, it just totally, absolutely irritates the people in Jerusalem. It makes them extremely angry. They are so upset. They don't like the idea of what Paul has been doing in the nations, what he's been doing with the non-Jews, and especially how he has taught them that they are saved through Christ alone and not through the observance of the Old Testament law. And he causes them to be extremely upset. So we see verse 22, up to this word, they listened to them. Yes, they were paying attention to them. Then they raised their voices and said, away with such a fellow from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live. Get rid of him. Push him out of here. He needs to not be alive. This would be a sin for us to avoid. Hatred toward anybody is not good. Hatred in our heart is not good toward others, even when they are doing sinful, wrong things. Our ultimate prayer for them would be that they would repent, that they would turn to the Lord, that they would be saved. That should be our prayer, not the desire for someone to really ultimately die, for someone to, or for something terribly bad to happen to other people. We should be praying for God's blessings to even be on our enemy. We should bless those that curse us, as Jesus tells us. So the Jews are definitely not happy with the Apostle Paul. Verse 23, as they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust into the air, the tribune ordered him to be brought into the barracks, saying that he should be examined by flogging. So the crowd is so upset that they are throwing off their robes, they're tearing, they're throwing dust in the air. They are so upset. And if you remember, when Paul was addressing the crowd, he was speaking in Hebrew. And so the tribune wouldn't have understood what he was saying. So all he knows is that Apostle Paul got up, waved his hands, got them all quiet, and was speaking to them, and that they were attentively listening, because we're told at the beginning of the speech it was a big old hush. And so the tribune is watching him speak, not having any idea what he's saying. And at the very end, he just sees them just all get upset and get all irritated. And this mob is coming after Paul. And so the tribune doesn't know what. He takes him in there and he says, here's how we'll figure out what is happening. We're going to flog him. And this flogging would have involved whips, and then these whips would have had bone or some sort of metal inside them. And so the Apostle Paul was going to be beaten by flogging, and they would hit him and then ask him questions. And the flogging was in an attempt to get information out of him to figure out what happened. So they stretched him out. People could have died from this flogging. This would have been the type of flogging that Jesus would have undergone before his crucifixion. So they stretch him out for the whips. Notice Paul waits. He doesn't say anything until they actually stretch him out and they're almost ready to punish him. And then Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, Is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman citizen and uncondemned? We're going to see it in the next reading that the Roman centurion said, "Whoa, we're in trouble here," because it was not lawful for a Roman citizen to be flogged without any sort of condemnation. There should have been a trial, or something should have happened before this flogging. And so the Apostle Paul is using his right as a Roman citizen to avoid this flogging. Again, it's not because the Apostle Paul is not ready for it. We know the Apostle Paul is going to die for Christ. We know that he's in Jerusalem because he's not running away from problems, but he is using his right. He is using the opportunity to avoid this punishment because it is an unlawful punishment. And if you can avoid it, avoid it. So, same thing for you and I. If we can avoid it through being wise, using a particular rights and things that we have, perhaps as Americans, as citizens, then we should use them. We should avoid these punishments if it is at all possible, not because we don't want to suffer for Christ or suffer for what is right, but just because it's the wise thing to do. We see the Apostle Paul doing that here. He will be arrested, of course. He's going to be in prison for a very long time. So it doesn't necessarily, he doesn't become free from this move, but he does avoid this massive beating that was getting ready to happen to him. So I pray that has been a blessing to you. You can avoid punishment, especially if it's unlawful, if at all possible. I pray that's been a blessing to you, and I'll see you all in the next video.